Welcome to the Lovestead.
Hello, welcome back to Lady Lovestead Reads. My name is Jessica and this is my July 2021 wrap-up. July 2021 was a good month overall. I got a little bit slumpy there towards the end of the month, but then picked back up. So in total, I read 14 books in the month of July, which is pretty good considering I hit a slump in there somewhere. So let's go ahead and start with the stats as usual.
On my physical TBR in July, I started out with 400 books. I've read 109 of them for a read percentage of 27%. On my Kindle, I have 222 books. I've read 24 of them for a read percentage of 10%. Of the books I read in July 2021, 1 came from my library, 7 came from my library's digital collection, 2 were from Kindle Unlimited, 2 were from my physical TBR, and 2 were on my Kindle TBR. Of the books I read this month, 4 of the authors were Black, Indigenous, or people of color. 2 of them were from the LGBTQIA community. 0 had a disability that they at least have disclosed, and 12 of them are women. For genre, in nonfiction, I read 4 social analysis, 3 memoir, 1 psychology, and 1 homesteading. In fiction, I read 1 classic, 3 thrillers, 2 mysteries, and 1 romance. In terms of stars, 2 books I gave 5 stars, 7 books I gave 4 stars, 3 books got 3 stars, I had 0, 2, or 1 stars, and I had 1 DNF. For target audience, I read 0 children's books, 0 middle grade, 1 young adult, 0 new adult, and 13 adult. In July, I started 4 new series. Of those 4 series, I will continue 3 of them. And I did read an additional installment of a series I've already started.
All right, let's go through what I read this past month. And really, I've got to say that the nonfiction I read came in clutch. I would not have read nearly as much as I did had I not read some really, really good nonfiction. I read most of the nonfiction on audiobook too. So I think that helped me with my reading slump. So first I read White Fragility by DiAngelo. A lot of people are familiar with this, especially because of the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that has happened in the past few years around anti-racist work in the United States. So White Fragility is basically a handbook for white people on how to do anti-racist work, and it's fairly short and easily digestible. I thought it was very well done, and I like that the advice that DiAngelo gives in this book does or it is concrete and actionable. Like, these are things that you can actually do and take action on in your own life. I've heard some various critiques of this book from different people in my life and given those some thought, and ultimately I do think that this is a good beginner guide for starting your own anti-racist work journey if you so decide to do that, which I really hope that you do. For me personally, I did find this to be extremely helpful for me, and I gave it 5 stars out of 5. Next, I read The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This I read as part of my goal to read 12 works of classic fiction in the year of 2021. This I read as part of my goal to read 12 classic fictions in the year 2021. I enjoyed The Picture of Dorian Gray. I can see why it is so popular. It really is a work of art and a work of genius. There are some characters in here that I've never read a character like them anywhere else. Like particularly Henry. He's a morally gray character. I mean, most of the characters in this are quite morally gray, but he especially like makes the case for some really terrible behavior and does it in a way that makes it seem like not terrible. I don't know. I've never read a character like Henry. And this book is really about Dorian, who is this like very beautiful young man, and he has his portrait painted, and he sees in the portrait how beautiful he is. And he has a conversation with Henry, and Henry convinces Dorian that the only thing that makes him a worthwhile human being is his beauty. And so he makes a deal, Dorian does, makes a deal with an evil, presumably the devil, that he will stay young forever and the portrait is what will grow old. And what I like about this is there's some questioning throughout the book of whether this was an actual deal with the devil and the portrait was actually growing old and he was staying young, or if Dorian was seeing things in the portrait that weren't really there and he was just projecting his own sense of inner ugliness onto the portrait. So I like that we were always kind of questioning, like, is this really happening? I don't really know. The characters, like I said, are all pretty morally gray. The writing is exquisite. It tackles ideas of like, what is beauty? Why is art important to humanity? What does art mean to us as humans? Tackles topics on hedonism and pleasure and just a lot of really interesting ideas tackled within a small work. I will say that the ending left me feeling yucky. Like, it's the best way I can describe it. I didn't finish reading this book and then think, oh, that was so satisfying. I finished reading this book and thought, oh, I feel gross. Like, ugh. So, because of that, I did give this 4 stars out of 5. Next, I read Ace by Angela Chen. This is a book about asexuality and what it means to society, how asexuality and the community of asexuals is redefining what relationships mean, redefining what sexuality means within relationships, and giving us language to talk about things like romance, sexuality, and relationship in ways that make it easier for people to understand themselves and where they fit within those concepts. I absolutely loved this book. I wish everybody would read it because I do think it will change the way you think about romance, relationships, and sexuality, no matter how you identify on any of those areas. And I did give it 5 stars out of 5. Next, I read The Keepsake by Tess Gerritsen. This is book number 7 in the Rosalian Isles series. This is a series of mystery thriller police procedurals, basically. The main characters are Maura Isles, who is the forensic pathologist, and Jane Rizzoli, who is a detective. They end up working together on a lot of different cases, and this case is no different. What is really interesting about this particular case is that the murderer is an archaeologist who has knowledge of ancient body preservation techniques. So he knows how to make mummies, he knows how to make bog bodies, and he does this to his murder victims. This adds such a cool twist to the work that Maura does as a forensic pathologist, because we have to see how this scientist is going to do an autopsy of a mummified body to try to figure out who killed her and what her cause of death was. And that is such an interesting twist to this kind of a story. Tess Gerritsen is a former medical doctor. She has medical degrees from Stanford, and her prowess in understanding these scientific concepts really shines through in her writing and just adds an extra layer into these books that I enjoy so much. I did give this book 4 stars out of 5. Next, I read One of Us is Lying by Karen M. McManus. This is a young adult thriller. It's the first book in the One of Us is Lying series. I do think that there's a television adaptation coming out, but I really like this book. If I were to describe it, comparing it to other things that I have read or consumed, it would be a mashup of Gossip Girl meets 13 Reasons Why meets Pretty Little Liars meets The Breakfast Club, and all of those things I absolutely love. I like how in this story the characters start out as archetypes in the beginning, but then they develop adequately to being complex and interesting characters in themselves so that they are no longer archetypes. The basic premise of this book is that these kids, 5 kids, go to detention, and during detention one of them dies, and kind of following and unraveling the story, and it's a multiple point of view book, so it rotates between the point of view of each of the kids that were in that detention. And it really is so interesting the way the stories are interwoven, how all of these kids have various secrets that end up getting revealed in the end. I really, really enjoyed it. There was just one little thing that I felt wasn't super realistic that I can't share with you because of spoilers, and so that did drop the star rating down from a 5 to a 4 stars out of 5. Next, I listened to Becoming by Michelle Obama on audiobook. This is basically her memoir of the experience she had going through living with a husband who becomes president of the United States. So it is a bit of her autobiography because it documents some of her childhood, at least what's relevant to the story that she really focuses on, which is meeting Barack, marrying Barack, going through the election process, experiences while he was president, and then some of her plans and things that she's thinking about doing now that he's left office and they're back in Chicago. And this was such a good book. She has so much wisdom, and like, Michelle is a rock star. She's got 2 Ivy League degrees. She's done so much for Chicago, for our country, and there's just a lot of wisdom to be had in her story. I am still thinking about some of the things that I read in that book a month later, and I'll probably continue to be thinking about some of the things I read in that book a month later. I think some of the advice and takeaways that you could get out of this book could be potentially life-changing for you. So I did give this book 5 stars out of 5. Next, I did a buddy read of a cozy mystery called Natural Thorn Killer by Kate Dyer-Seeley. This is the first book in the Rose City Murder Mysteries, and I buddy read this with my friend Ro and Breezy in the Killing Time with Cozy's book club. Ro doesn't have a booktube channel anymore, but Breezy does, and I will leave her information in the description box down below. Natural Thorn Killer is about a woman who divorces her deadbeat of a husband, moves back to Oregon with her aunt to help her aunt run a flower shop. And when she goes back, she's helping them prepare for a town event that they're going to have to help the neighborhood and all the local businesses in the neighborhood. And there's a real estate developer who wants to buy out all the properties and do what real estate developers do, those evil real estate developers. Why are they always the evil ones? Anyway, the real estate developer gets murdered, and they find the body in her aunt's shop, and so, you know, they got to figure out the murder from there. This was a really fun book. The writer's knowledge of working in a flower shop was spot on. I do have experience working in flower design myself, and she really, really did her research, or has worked in flower design herself at some point, because she had such in-depth knowledge of the industry. I enjoyed this one a lot. Gave it 4 stars out of 5. Next was another nonfiction called Pathological Altruism. This was edited by Barbara Oakley. This is a collection of academic essays about the concept of pathological altruism. The essays span from being based in a biological study of the concept to more of a political social study of the concept. This was a really, really good book. I was originally going to do a separate review of it, but I had to return it to the library before I could get the review done. So that didn't happen, but some of the concepts that I thought were most interesting from pathological altruism was just the concept of pathological altruism in itself. Pathological altruism is when someone genuinely does things to help others, but those actions end up being harmful either to themselves or to other people. So like, think about the woman who sacrifices everything for her family and loses herself in the process. Like, that's pathological altruism, where she might genuinely want to do good things for her family, but the outcome is ultimately hurting her or hurting others. And another really cool concept that I learned about this is the concept of self-addiction, particularly addiction to self-righteousness. There is this essay about addiction to self-righteousness, and it just has me thinking about so many things. So the concept and the studies that have been done is that self-righteousness triggers similar brain chemical responses as other process addictions. So process addictions are ones that don't necessarily involve ingesting a chemical, Things like gambling and shopping and video gaming are process addictions, where we get addicted to the feeling that comes from gambling or shopping or whatever. And there is now research out there showing that humans can also become addicted to the feeling of self-righteousness. And it has the same brain chemistry and function as other process addictions like gambling, video gaming, and shopping. And that just was so interesting to learn about. So really, really like this, but what I don't like about this book is it's written in academic style, which is very hard to read, understand, and access. And I think it would be much better if these concepts were more easily accessed by a wider reader audience. So 4 stars out of 5. Next, I DNF'd Wicked Intentions by Elizabeth Hoyt. This is the first book in the Maiden Lane series by Elizabeth Hoyt. It is a historical romance, and this is about Temperance, who runs an orphanage, and Lazarus, who is hunting for someone who murdered his mistress. Now, the reason that I DNF'd this is because Lazarus is a sociopath. And Temperance is someone who could be defined as someone who practices pathological altruism. Like, she sacrifices herself in ways that really aren't super necessary in order to make other people's lives better. And the author ships the two. And I think that is such a toxic relationship, and it just, I couldn't get into the book. I didn't want them together in the end. I didn't care what happened to them. I hope that they went their separate ways, but we were supposed to be rooting for them to be together. And then, you know, I knew that the author was going to be like having Temperance save Lazarus, but you can't really save a sociopath, so I just couldn't buy into this story at all. And I ended up DNFing it at 150 pages. Next, I read Daughter of Empire by Lady Pamela Mountbatten. This is another biography about Lady Mountbatten's life. Well, I should say autobiography, because she wrote it herself. And there are some parts of her story that I found pretty interesting, like her descriptions of how India gained their independence because it was her father and her family who were there at that time in India. I also thought her experience during World War II was interesting. She did have to flee to America, but she fled and lived with the Vanderbilts in New York City. So it's like, a lot of this book was just a story of wealth and privilege, to be perfectly honest. And I can't fault her for that, because that's what she was born into. That was her life. But I also don't think that would be very interesting to just the average reader. I found it interesting enough to finish the book because I really like royal history. But I don't think the average person would get that much out of it, honestly. So for me, it was a 3 out of 5 stars, but I can't say that I really recommend it. Next, I read Scene of the Grind by Tonya Kappes. This is the first book in her Killer Coffee Cozy Mystery series. This one is set in Kentucky, in a small town, and the main character opens a coffee shop, divorces her husband, moves back to her small town. Are you sensing a theme here with Cozy Mysteries? But yeah, so she divorces her deadbeat husband, moves back to her a small town where she spent a lot of her childhood, and opens a coffee shop. And there's a murder. And I liked this for the cozy atmosphere. The mystery was very formulaic. I figured out not only the killer, but the motive and how they did it early on in the story. And so for that, this was a 3 out of 5 stars. However, I like the setting and the characters enough to continue with this series and give book number 2 a try. Next was another nonfiction. I read The Beginner's Guide to Chickens by Anna Kuo. This is a book overview of how to care for backyard chickens if you're new to keeping chickens, which I am and which I will be. So I gave that one 4 stars out of 5. Next, I read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This book is kind of a mashup of a genre. It's like part memoir, part scientific exploration, and part social critical analysis. It talks a lot about, or she talks a lot about, like the Native American history, particularly Potawatomi history, which is really, really important because there are so few Potawatomi elders left that a lot of that history is going to be lost when they when they die. She talks a lot about permaculture, which is something that I am super interested in myself. The spirituality behind even just gardening. She talks a lot about what she calls the, I always forget the word, the honorable harvest. She talks a lot about the honorable harvest, which is the rule of not taking more than half in your garden and never taking more than what you need. So there's just a lot of good nuggets in this one. It's right up my alley as someone who has homesteading / small farm dreams myself, someone who's passionate about the environment myself, someone who kind of is a bit of a spiritual woo-woo kind of a person myself. But there's a lot to appreciate in it, no matter who you are. Like, if you like history, there's history in it. If you like science, there's science in it. If you like memoir, there's memoir in it. So I do recommend this book for a lot of people, and I gave it 4 stars out of 5. The last book that I read in July was a book I read as a buddy read with Francois from Mr. Francis Reads. It was The Guest List by Lucy Foley. The premise of this one is that there is a wedding on a remote island off Galway, Ireland, and at the wedding everybody's kind of isolated on this island and someone gets murdered. And this isn't a typical thriller in that, or like even a murder mystery, because it's a very slow burn as to even who the victim is. But I really liked the slow burn, and I really liked the character development. It's a multiple point of view story, and you get to learn about the history of all of the different guests there, not all of them, but the most important guests there, and how those histories intertwine. And she just does a really good job of weaving that story. If you like books that are like heavy on action when it comes to mystery thrillers, this probably isn't the book for you. But if you like a slow burn and if you like a lot of character development, you might like this one quite a bit. I really, really liked it. Some issues at the beginning in terms of writing. The writing, I would say, for the first 2 to 3 chapters felt pretty amateur, but after the first few chapters, Lucy Foley does tighten things up and kind of finds her groove. So I do give it 4 stars out of 5 because of that slow start. I mean, some people would even put the book down if they didn't like those first few chapters. So 4 out of 5 stars because of the slow start, but overall, I really liked it. I really liked the slow burn on it. I liked the characters a lot. Okay, now, one of the things that I like to do every month is I like to pick out a book of the month, a crush of the month, and a new favorite character. So I'm going to go with a nonfiction and a fiction because I read so much nonfiction this month, and that was a really hard choice to pick my favorite nonfiction of the month. It was really a toss-up between Braiding Sweetgrass and Becoming by Michelle Obama. And I decided just to go with Braiding Sweetgrass because there's not necessarily like that political background and tension and stuff with that. But I don't know. Now that I think about it, yeah, I was just going to say it's a tie. It's a tie between, my headband is not staying on. It's a tie between Braiding Sweetgrass and Becoming. I can't say no to Becoming. Becoming was so good. So that's the nonfiction, a tie between those two. For fiction, I've got to say the book of the month was The Guest List. That was the best fiction that I read in July. I think my favorite character this past month was Hannah from The Guest List. She's one who you get the point of view of Hannah, and I just really liked her. I thought she was so kind and compassionate and fair, and like, I was so mad about something that happens to her. She's the kind of character that I would want to be like her best friend and like totally go to bat for her. So my new crush, I think my new crush would be, okay, so I always do 2. I do a guy and a gal since I am asexual panromantic. My headband is bugging me. bugging me. Stay on my head, please. So for the fella who would be my new crush, probably Basil Hallward. He is in the picture of Dorian Gray. He is the artist who paints Dorian. Very gentle, romantic spirit. The other male characters that I read this month in the mysteries and the thrillers, no thanks. And then I would have to say too that if I had to go on a date with any of the female characters that I read this month, I'd want to go on a date with Hannah from the guest list by Lucy Foley. For all the reasons that I mentioned, she's one of my new favorite characters. Yep. All right, that'll do it for this month's wrap up. I hope that you also had a pretty good reading month. If you made it this far in the video, go ahead and leave a sunflower or a flower emoji in the chat down below. And until next time, make sure that you continue to read good books, drink good coffee, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye!